Good evening. Get started in a second here. This is going to be the information session for the affordable units at 11 East Pleasant in Amherst. See people are coming in, so we'll just let a few more folks roll in and then we'll get started. All right, looks like one person is connecting to the audio. I assume everyone else can hear me okay, but let me know if not. And then I am going to share my screen. All right, so I assume everyone can see my screen. I got a PowerPoint slide going, and we'll go through that. I will make that. This will be recorded. We will post the recording to our website. That'll go up, should go up by tomorrow. We can make the slides available to anyone upon request. So as you're tuning in here, don't feel like you have to write everything down or memorize anything. All of this can be made available to you. And really, most of this information is from the information packet and the application, which maybe you've already seen. They're on our website. You can download them straight from our website. We can send them to you in the mail, by email, by fax, however you want. So all this information's there. And the purpose of this session is really for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Whatever you're most comfortable doing. If we get a few people on, sometimes I might miss the chat. So frankly, personally, I appreciate it if people speak up. It's easier for me to respond to. It's quicker. I can assure everyone else can hear the answer. They might be interested in the question and the answer that question you have and the answer that I give. But if there are people who want to put questions in the chat, I will check in on that periodically as well. Let's just get started here. So this is the information session for the affordable units at 11 East Pleasant Street in Amherst. In total, there are 11 affordable units. And this property is a little bit different than some of the ones that we work with. Oftentimes in affordable housing, affordability is usually defined at 80% of area median income, meaning households can make up to 80% of area median income. And affordable rents, or if it's sales prices are calculated from those 80% figures. And there are various geographic regions within Massachusetts that have different area median income limits. So the income limits and hence the rents that you'd see in Amherst are going to be less than what they would be in Boston and the surrounding communities, which would be different from the limits that you might see around Worcester and so on and so forth. So just to give you a little bit of context, there are 9 affordable units that are going to be made available to households at 80% of AMI and 2 for households at 60% of AMI. And just to be sure, can everyone see I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen share. They can see the slide that I have up. Yeah. Okay, great. And so further breaking that down, we have 4 studio units. The rent for a 60% studio unit is $916. There's one of those. And the rent for an 80% studio unit is $1,265 a month. We've also got 4 one-bedroom units. There's one 60% AMI unit that's going to be renting for $1,025 a month. And there is also 3 one-bedrooms at 80% of AMI, and those will rent at $1,424 per month. And lastly, There are 3 2-bedroom units. Those are all 80%, no 60% on those. And those are at 1,568 per month. I'll talk a little bit more about rents in a few minutes. The deadline to submit a lottery application is February 7th at 2 p.m. There are various ways that you can submit an application to us, and they're all written right on the first page of the application. So whatever works best for you is fine for us. So if you want to, I would say most households email it to us, and you can certainly do that. If you want to fax it, you can. If you want to put it in the mail, that's fine. If you want to come to our office at Hillside 257 Hillside Ave in Needham, you can do that as well. We have a 24-hour secure drop box. When you walk up to our office and you're looking at it, the drop box is on the left-hand side of the building. We check it every day. We bring it in, and your documents will get processed, same as people who would send it in any other way. One important takeaway of hopefully a couple from this session is get your application in early. This is a full documentation lottery, meaning that with your lottery application, you have to supply your income and asset documentation to prove that you're eligible. So you got to provide bank statements, you got to provide taxes, you got to provide pay stubs, you got to provide explanations of deposits into your bank accounts that don't clearly correspond to a job or other information we have on file. It is totally doable. We've collected complete applications from thousands and thousands of households over the years. However, there's a lot to document, especially depending on what your circumstances are. For example, if you're self-employed, or if you have a lot of additional benefits outside of a job, or if your pay is sort of sporadic and infrequent, or one of myriad other circumstances, there can be a lot to document. And I would say that the vast majority of households that we've worked with over the years, and we've worked with tons, do not submit a 100% complete application on the first submission. There's usually something missing, or even if you give us everything according to what's required, sometimes those things raise additional questions and we need to ask about those things. So don't wait until February 7th to submit your application. Get it in earlier than that. You will have an opportunity to amend it and build upon it if anything is missing. We typically try and get back to people within 3 business days of when we receive their application, and we will give you a bulleted checklist of anything that might need explanation or anything that might be missing. So you don't want to be scrambling on February 7th trying to track down stuff, especially if it's stuff that's not in your possession or within your control, right? If you're having to get it from a third party, and guess what? They might not be on your timeline or feeling as rushed as you are. So try to avoid putting yourself in that situation. Get your stuff in early. Even if you know it's not totally complete, that's okay. Just get it in, sort of get a sense of what's missing. We'll work with you. And, if we have to go back and forth a few times to get your application complete, that's totally fine. That's totally normal. All right. Let me just give you a little bit about us. Who is SEB Housing? What's our role in all of this? So we are a offsite affordable housing consulting group. We've been hired by the developers of this project. But we work on a lot of other affordable housing projects across the state of Massachusetts and in a few other states on occasion as well. We're not the development team, so we don't own it. We don't invest in the project. We're not on site. We don't manage it either. Okay, but we work with the ownership and we work with their management group to assist them with respect to the affordable units. And we really are your first point of contact at this stage of the process. I mean, if you've separately had contact with them, you certainly can, that's fine. But we're the ones that have been hired to run the lottery and to put together all the marketing materials, to assemble the information packet and application, get it up on our website, and really help people who want to apply for this and ultimately make decisions about who is and who isn't eligible for this housing. So some of you may have already been in touch with us already, or if you haven't, if you're going to apply, you almost certainly will. Now, later in the process, and we'll talk about this as we go through the presentation, we will do a lottery, and then you will be handed off to the management team, so separate group for lease screening, and at that point, they'd really become your primary contact. So that just gives you some sense. You will be interacting with different groups through this process, but we work collaboratively, we work together, we share information, we just do slightly different things in this process. If you haven't been there already, we have a website, we have this opportunity and all the other ones, not all, but many of, other active lotteries and units that we're working on. So if you go to sebhousing.com, you go to I want to rent, and you'll find this opportunity there. You can click on the thumbnail for this property, and that will take you to a page, and you can download the information packet and application right from that page, and get some other pertinent information there. And again, that's where this recording will go, should be there by tomorrow. Our email is info@scbhousing.com. We have a admin staff of 5 people that respond to that. We try and get back to people very quickly. You can also call us. I will tell you, if you call, you're probably going to have to leave a voicemail. Just given the volume, we can't pick up the phone all the time for everyone who calls us, but please do leave a message. We check the messages, we transcribe them, we get back to people. So if you do want to call us, please don't hang up and not leave a message, because then we'll have no idea that you called and won't be able to call you back. But so I guess in summary, email is best, it's preferable, but if you want to call, you certainly can. Just leave a message if we don't pick up, and we'll get back to you that day or by the next day. All right, let's talk. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about the units, we're going to talk about the apartments, the community, the surrounding areas. We'll talk about the eligibility criteria and income limits, and that's going to be an overview. It's going to be a little bit of a snapshot. I mean, everyone's income and assets are different. The application that you fill out has really specific, and I hope you'll find sort of comprehensive, thorough explanations of what you need if a particular item applies to you. And if it doesn't apply to you, you can just check off not applicable and move on. But so it'll give an overview of that, but for the real sort of nitty gritty, you're going to be filling that out in the application, and that will tell you exactly what's needed. We'll talk about the lottery and how that's going to run, and then what to expect after the lottery, and how the process works after that. So let's just start by talking a little bit about the community and the units themselves. And frankly, some of you may live in Amherst or be familiar with this area. I apologize, I don't. So I'm sort of learning about it, but I can't speak from firsthand. So but here's what I got, and you may know additional things. That's fine. This is an all electric community, which is pretty cool. I think there's a trend in that way. I don't know how many I've seen yet, but no oil, no gas. So all the utilities are electric. It's in downtown Amherst, so seems like a great location. There's a lot going on there. It's got a fitness center, which I believe is 24/7 in the property. There is some storage for rent. There's indoor bike storage available. It's located on a bus route right near the Amherst Town Common as well. You've got a lot of restaurants around there. I've listed out a few, but looks like, Johnny's Tavern and Antonio's Pizza, Pita Pockets, Brugger's Bagels, Garcia's Mexican Restaurant, and others. So no shortage of places to eat. Many of these are less than a mile away. Obviously, I think UMass Amherst, the university, is less than a mile away. Looks like there's a lot of other schools there too. There's the Amherst Pelham Regional High School, less than a mile. There's the Amherst Regional Middle Schools, less than a mile. A couple elementary schools as well. One of this one's 1.3 miles, the other one's less than a mile, and I think I saw another one too. There's green spaces abound. Wildwood Conservation Area is about 1.5 miles away. The Amethyst Brook Conservation's about 2 miles, and Whitney Conservation a little closer to 2.5, among many other community amenities and features that that exist there. Units themselves, I recommend, I was looking today, if you haven't been, go on the property's website. They have a nice website. They've got a bunch of photos of the units. They look very sleek and modern and nice. There's big windows, kind of open concepts. You can see the different floor plans for the different bedroom sizes, so you can take a spin through those and get a sense of what's available. So if you haven't done that already, I recommend that you do, so you can see that. Again, looks like a beautiful building and beautiful units. They got stainless steel appliances, all-in-one laundry machines. I've heard about those. I can't say I've actually seen one before, but I did see a photo on the website. It looks like it's just one, so you, I don't know if you have to do a different cycle when you wash it, dry it, how that works, but seems pretty space efficient, so that's cool. There's internet in the units. There's electric air conditioning and heating. Like I said, saw some beautiful large windows in the units as well, so they get a lot of natural light, which is great. And then, so I mentioned before, let me just slide back here. Here are the rents, and again, you don't have to memorize or write down any of this because it's in the information packet, the application, the ad, it's on our website, so you'll see it there. But these are the monthly rents for the different units. That does not include the cost of electricity. So, whatever you consume in electricity would be your additional responsibility on top of the monthly rent that I just showed you. But cold water and sewer are included in the rent. Okay, so you would not have to pay additional for those. There is no on-site parking. I don't know exactly what the parking is like in that area, but just something to be mindful of. If you have a car, there is not on-site parking. Any questions so far? No? Okay.
Hey, David, real quick, not a question. This is Alex from the management team.
Hey, Alex.
Just want to make sure. Good. I just want to make sure it's talked about. All of the apartments are fully furnished. So that's an important deciding factor, I know, for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, thank you for raising that. Yep, so that's great. Apartments come fully furnished. And what is that's like with a chairs, bed, dining table, that kind of thing, Alex?
Correct. Coffee table, dining table. It's going to include your sofa, love seat, all of those items that you would normally have in your living room and bedrooms. And then every apartment also includes a dishwasher and a microwave.
Great, great. Thank you. Anything else about the property or the community you want to add, or did I sort of give enough?
For parking, you would, as a downtown resident, qualify for the downtown parking permit. And so that permit allows you to park in different lots downtown that are allocated for downtown residents and workers. And so that's procured through the town of Amherst. And you just bring a copy of your lease, and then you pay them the fee. It's between $50 and $100, but it does cover you for the entire year. So it's only a one-time cost.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. That's pretty cheap.
Yeah, definitely.
That's $50 to $100 a year. I wouldn't even be a month around here. All right, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go on, and Alex, you should feel free to jump in at any time, or if I have questions that I think you could jump in, I'll let you know. So let's go on. So that's a bit about the community. Let's talk about who's eligible. So hopefully now you've seen that, see that this is, these are sleek apartments in a great area. Who's eligible? So again, you've got 2 units at 60% of AMI, and the other ones are all at 80% of AMI. The biggest criteria for qualifying for these affordable units, or any affordable units in the programs we work in, is you got to have under a certain income limit. No surprise there. They're affordable. They're priced accordingly. And so you got to make less than a certain amount because that's who these units are there to serve. So the amounts are by household size. Okay, so household size of 1 applying for a 60% AMI unit can make $41,850. and then all the way down through 4 people could make up to 59,775. For 80% units, it's going to be higher than that, obviously. Household size of 1 can make up to 55,800. And then going all the way down to household size of 4 can make up to 79,700. Just to be clear, this is gross income for all household members. It's not your net after-tax income. It's your gross income, unless you're self-employed, okay? And in that case, you would fill out a profit and loss statement in the application, and you'd be able to note what your business expenses are, and that would come off, okay? And so your net income as the operator of the business would be what would be counting against these income limits. But for anyone who's a W-2 employee, we're looking at gross income. As I said, it's for everyone in the household. There are 2 exceptions. So minors, so under the age of 18. So if there's a 16-year-old kid in the house who works, we still need to see that documented, but that income does not count. It does not get counted towards these limits. And or if you have a full-time student in the house who's a dependent, so if someone claims that student on their tax return, anything above $480 does not count towards these income limits. So if there's a full-time student, let's say they study at UMass Amherst full-time, but they work as well, and they make $10,000 a year, let's say, just to pick a random number. Well, guess what? We count 480 of that, and the remaining amount doesn't count towards these income limits. Keep in mind that the income limits are based on household size. The rent of the unit, though, is the rent of the unit. Okay, so that doesn't change. So someone applying for a 2-person household applying for a studio unit is going to pay the same rent as a 1-person household applying for a studio unit, but that 2-person household can make $6,000 more and still qualify. So theoretically, there may be more cushion for that 2-person household because they get the benefit of that higher income limit, but they're still paying the same rent. Again, that's theoretically, but just to kind of show you how that works. One good thing about rental, unlike home ownership, affordable opportunities, is there's no asset limitation. So, like there are, sometimes people in these programs who are retired, they're on a fixed income, they're below the income limit. They might have a lot in assets, and that's typically not going to hurt their chances of qualifying unless those assets generate a lot of income, okay? Because we do have to count income generated from assets. And that's the higher of the actual income generated or an imputed rate of 0.06%, which is not very much. It's a rare case that someone has assets that generate income that puts them over the income limit. Unless they are already pretty close to these income limits just based on the income that they actually get. So just in most cases, the assets, the income from the assets are not going to push people over. They could, but in most cases they don't. Again, that being said, you do have to provide documentation of your assets. So as an example, what you have in a checking account or a savings account, those are assets, but we still got to see statements, what's in there. I will talk about this when we talk about the lottery and the waiting list compositions, but we do have to give priority for the 2-bedroom units to larger household types. The program wants to make sure that people aren't overhoused in a unit when there might be a larger family who could really use both bedrooms. So when I show you how the waiting list will be constructed from the lottery, I'll show you how that sort of plays out. You cannot own a home at the time of lease signing. If you own one now and you want to apply, that's okay. You would get a conditional letter of eligibility if you're otherwise eligible for the lottery. But that notice would say, just FYI, we're going to have to see evidence that you've sold the home before you can sign a lease for one of these units. And lastly, a household cannot have a financial interest in the development or be a related party. To my knowledge, it's pretty rare that someone applying for the affordable units is going to be, have a financial interest in the development, like be an investor or something like that. But something that does come up more often is the related party prohibition, because sometimes we get asked, like, can someone who works for the leasing office apply for one of these units? And the answer is technically they cannot. So, like, employees of Amherst Innovative Living are barred from living in the affordable units. Market rate ones are different. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, moving right along. Just to rehash a little bit of what we talked about a minute ago. So, biggest sort of criteria of eligibility is income. We're looking at pay stubs. If you're self-employed, you're going to have to fill out at least one profit and loss statement for the current year. If you have taxes for the prior year, we can use those. But if you don't, you'd have to do a profit and loss statement for the prior year. And if you expect changes for the future year, you'd have to do one for a future year. So you could do as few as one or as many as three. We do have to, when calculating income, take the higher of year to date or the average of the most recent 5 pay stubs. This does come up sometimes, like people will work a lot of overtime that's reflected in their most recent pay stubs, but they haven't necessarily worked that much overtime over the course of the previous months in the year. But just by program rule, we have to assume someone will continue to work extra hours, to work overtime, to get paid at that rate over the course of the next 12 months. And so that's what we'd have to use to do our projections. Unless there's a really clear documented history of, like, for say a seasonal worker, that every year they work, these 8 months out of the year, and then those 4 months they don't. And we can see that pattern going back several years. In that case, sort of extrapolating, here's what they made in 8 months, and that's what it's going to look like over 12 months, wouldn't really be accurate or fair, because we can see they never work 12 months. They always only work 8 months. And that's what they make for the entire year. But that's different from someone who, works a certain amount in the year, then works a bunch of, overtime or something like that, or gets a huge bonus, but says, oh, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna do that next year. That was just sort of this, specific to these last few months, and that's gonna change. We can't sort of accept that unless there's been a history of that. Okay. Benefits, that counts as income. So, if you're collecting unemployment, if you're getting Social Security, if you're getting child support, that counts as income. Periodic payments from friends and family, that counts as income, as do myriad other sources, which are all disclosed in the application. And in the application, it'll say for each and every income source what documentation you're going to need to provide to us relative to that source. Like I said, no asset limitation, but you do still need to document your assets. Checking and savings accounts are probably the biggest one, that most common one, I guess I would say. So you'll need to provide the last 3 most recent account statements, certificates of deposit, net cash value of stocks and retirement accounts. I get it. If you're not 65, you might say, I'm not touching that anytime soon. Why are we looking at that? But in most cases, you could still access it. You'd pay a penalty, but the net cash value post penalty is what we'd be looking at. But again, there's no asset limit. So, you might have bonds, you might have Venmo, PayPal, some of those other cash apps. Again, the money you have in your Venmo or your PayPal account really isn't any different than the money you have in your checking and savings account. So we got to see it. Those accounts are often, sources of questions about money going in. We got to be sure it's not from a job you haven't told us about. All right. That's income and assets. Any questions? All right, moving along. So when you fill out your lottery application, among other questions, one question you're going to get is, what is your household type? This is pretty self-explanatory, I hope, but you just kind of go through, and if you're a one-person household, you're going to check which one you are. I'm just a one-person household, or I'm a one-person household with a disability and I need 2 bedrooms. Or, here are the various 2-person household compositions. You could be a 3-person household, you could be a 4-person household. So hopefully pretty straightforward. Just check off the one that applies to you. Now next to each one, you'll see there's a type 1, type 2, type 1, type 2, type 2, type 2, type 2. That relates to when we do the actual lottery and we create the waiting lists, how we sort them. So let me actually skip ahead a slide and show you that, because as I think I said a few minutes ago, by program rule, we don't want households to be overhoused in the units if there are other households who need all of the bedrooms. So when we do the lottery and we create the waiting lists, one of the factors that influences where a household is on the waiting list is where they were drawn. Were they drawn first? Were they drawn second? Were they drawn third? And so on and so forth. But that's not the only factor. There are other factors, including whether a household has local preference. You can see there are 3 local preference waiting lists, and also their household type. So as an example, for this lottery, once we've run the lottery and we've sorted the results, we'll create the waiting lists. And here you see we have a waiting list for 3 2-bedroom apartments at 80% of AMI. Well, the top households are all going to be type 2 local preference households. And they'll be followed by type 2 non-local preference households. It doesn't matter if these people are drawn before these people in the lottery, because it's a local preference waiting list. So the local households who work in Amherst or live in Amherst or have kids attending the Amherst schools, that's what local preference means. So these type 2 local preference households will be first, followed by type 2 non-local preference households. And then we go to type 1 local preference households, and then type 1 non-local preference households. Again, this is regardless of where you're drawn in the lottery. So as an example, if someone who lives in Wakefield applies for this lottery, so they don't work in Amherst, they don't live in Amherst, they don't have local preference, they're a 1-person household, they apply for a 2-bedroom unit and they're drawn first in the lottery. Well, they're this person actually on the 2-bedroom list. They're not local, they're a type 1. It doesn't matter that they were drawn first, they'll be behind these other households. These are in the information packet. You can take a look, study it if you're interested, or you don't have to pay any attention to it. Don't worry about it. We'll handle sorting the waiting list from the lottery. But I do think one takeaway is just to know that for larger household types, these type 2 households, so if you're, like a parent and a child, 1 household plus 1 dependent, that's type 2, or if you're a 3-person household or a 4-person household, you're going to get priority on the 2-bedroom waiting list. For 1-bedroom studio units, household type doesn't matter. Nobody is overhoused in one of those units. People will get equal priority regardless of their type. I also want to note that even though there is priority for local preference households on some of the lists, all households will be on the list. If you don't have local preference, you should definitely still apply. You definitely still have a very good chance of getting a unit. You should not let that be something that discourages you from applying. As you can see on this list, a non-local type 2 household is going to be before, a type 1 local household. And there are also general preference waiting lists where local preference doesn't make any difference. All in all, I'd say, regardless of your household type or if you have local preference or not, definitely still apply. I think if you're in the lottery, there's a very good chance you will be offered an opportunity to move on in the next step of the process, which is to apply for a lease. I want to say another thing about the lottery too. We all have a conception of, when you hear about a lottery, you think there's winners and losers. People will ask, who got picked? Did I win? Did I lose? That kind of nomenclature. In these lotteries that we run, everyone gets picked and everyone gets a place on the waiting list. So there aren't really winners or losers. Really, what the lottery does is establish an order of priority. When are you going to get invited? Are you going to get invited relative to the other households who were in the lottery? So nobody wins or loses. If you apply for multiple different bedroom types, you'll be on multiple different waiting lists. I always encourage people, if you think you're interested potentially in a bedroom size, apply for it. You can pick more than one. You can apply for a studio, a 1 and a 2 bedroom unit. That's totally fine. And if you think you might be happy in any of those, you should apply for all of them. Because the worst thing that can happen is, your number comes up on the 2 bedroom list and you say, you know what, actually, thanks, but no thanks. I'm waiting for my invitation on the 1 bedroom and studio list. I'm going to see what happens with those. So there's really no downside to being over inclusive when you fill out your lottery application. Check off that you're, applying to all 3. I mean, if you're really not interested in one, that's a different thing. But if you think you might be, I recommend checking it off. Conversely, if you only say that you're applying for a studio, and then later on you kind of have a change of heart and you say, geez, I kind of wish I could get a 1 bedroom. Well, maybe you could, but you wouldn't be on the lottery drawn 1 bedroom waiting list. You'd have to apply as if you missed the lottery, and you'd be behind all of the lottery households on the waiting list. So better to be more inclusive rather than less inclusive when filling out the application. When you fill out, I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but this is not a 1 bite at the apple type of scenario. You submit your application. If anything's missing, we'll let you know, and we can go back and forth multiple times up until we get to the deadline. And many people do need a few submissions to get it complete. If you're like I said, if you're incomplete, we'll give you a bulleted checklist of what's outstanding. If you're ineligible, we'll let you know why, and you can always appeal that if you think we've made an error. If you are eligible, you will get a lottery number, and it's going to be in this form that you see right here, A.blank blank blank. That doesn't mean anything. If you're A.001, that doesn't mean that you're the first household in the lottery or anything like that. It is simply a way of keeping your name and information confidential, so that when we run the lottery, we aren't sharing people's names. We're just saying, the first household that was drawn was A.001, and the next household was A.005, and so on and so forth. And then after the lottery, we'll send around the waiting lists, and we'll have them populated according to these lottery application numbers. So your number, so you can say, hey, I was A.005, and you'll find where you are on the waiting list. But nobody else is going to see your name. They're just going to see A.005, and they're not going to have any idea who that is. That's anyway, I don't think many people read into that, but don't read into it. The number doesn't mean anything. It's just a way of keeping your information confidential. The lottery date is March 7th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. It's going to be just like this. We'll put everyone who's eligible for the lottery into a lottery box. We'll pull out the numbers. We'll show them as we go. It's hard to tell. I'll tell you right now, you're totally encouraged to come if you want to. That's great. The actual lottery drawings don't take very long. They're kind of quick. It's a little hard to tell in real time what it means, because we're kind of putting all the numbers in a box and we're drawing them out, but then we have to sort them and populate the waiting list. So, if you're drawn very first in the lottery, that might mean you're number 1 on a waiting list, but it might not. It just depends, which bedroom sizes you applied for and what priorities you have, if any. The good news is that even though it's hard to tell in real time, like, hey, what does that mean exactly? We'll send you the results. We usually get them out that same night. So we'll, sort the results, create the waiting list, and then we'll send you an email with instructions and information, and it'll have all the waiting lists with the lottery numbers on it. And so that night you'll be able to see that and say, okay, I'm fifth on the studio list, and I'm third on the 1-bedroom list, and I'm 10th on the 2-bedroom list, or whatever it might be. And we'll give we'll give you the contact information for Alex and the leasing office, and we will share your information with them so that you two can get in touch with each other for the next step of the process. Now, to be clear, this whole thing that we're doing, that SEB does, the application with us, is we are determining whether you are eligible for the affordable housing program. We are not determining if you are eligible for a lease. That's a separate consideration that the management team does, and they look at different criteria. So they might look at things like your credit history or your rental history, if you have a criminal background, things like that. We're not looking at any of that. We don't ask for that. It's not our business. What that means is you could be program eligible, but not lease eligible. Okay, you might make under the income limits, and you don't have a financial interest, and you're not a related party, and you don't own a home, so you meet all the program criteria. But when it comes to lease screening, it turns out you have credit that doesn't meet their criteria, or you have a rental history that doesn't meet their criteria, or whatever the case may be. So do not give notice to your current landlord or make permanent plans to move out if you have a very high waiting list position, because there is still this big step that you need to complete. And that would be a shame if you gave notice and then it turns out you weren't actually lease eligible here, and now you've kind of put yourself in a pickle. So you want to wait before making any definitive plans to actually complete the lease screening and be told, yes, you are eligible, and yes, there is a unit here for you. It's unit 200, and here's a move-in date. One of the advantages of being having a high waiting list position, is you can choose from any of the available units on that waiting list. So there are what was it, 4 studio units, 3 of them at 80% of AMI. So if you're the top household on the 80% studio list, when you get invited by the leasing office to submit after the lottery to submit a lease application, and assuming you're lease eligible, they're going to say, here are the 3 studio affordable units at 80% of AMI. Which one do you choose? You're number 1 on the waiting list. You get your first choice. And then the household after you would be able to choose from the remaining 2, and then the third person, well, they wouldn't have a choice because there's only 3 total. But so that's the advantage of having sort of the highest waiting list positions. The leasing office may, and we usually recommend that they do, invite more households than there are units. So as I just said, there were 3 of those studio 80% units. Let's pretend there are 10 households on that waiting list after the lottery. We would tell them you should probably invite more than 3 people from that studio list to come in and submit a lease application, because in our experience, usually a leasing office has to invite more people to fill the units than there are units. In other words, it's not a 1-to-1 hit rate. And as long as they're transparent about that and everyone kind of knows the deal, that will enable them to get the units filled much more quickly than if they go 1 by 1 by 1, and so on and so forth. They do have to honor the waiting list order, so this is not a race to come in and submit your lease application. There will be a deadline that's the same for everyone, and no one's going to be offered a unit out of turn. Again, they may not decide to do it that way. They can decide that when they get to it, but just as an FYI, many leasing offices do it that way. we recommend doing it that way. It's just a much more efficient way to get these units filled. You know, if you get that invite, you can choose from the units on the list you're invited from, not necessarily any unit in the building. So, you know, if you're, let's say you're, you know, number one on the studio local list and you get invited to come in and apply for a studio, but you're also on the 2-bedroom list, you don't get to then go in and choose a 2-bedroom if you haven't been invited from that list yet. Maybe you're, you know, 20th on the 2-bedroom list, you know, so you have very different placements. You get to choose from the studio units available because that's what you were invited for at that time. You have a much lower, in my hypothetical here, you know, you might have a much lower position on the 2-bedroom list, and you wouldn't be able to get to select one of those units till you actually get invited from that list, which, you know, we don't know yet when that will be. It depends kind of where you are on that list. Okay, let's see here. And then as long as you move in within 6 months of the lottery date, you don't need to do any update with us. If you, for whatever reason, push that date out, if there's a, I don't know, a construction delay or some other thing that happens and you can't move into the unit until December of this year, you would have to update your file with us, but that's not something that happens often. And then as long as you know, if you sign a lease for a unit and move in, one of the really nice things about this program is you can grow a little bit with the unit in terms of your income. So your income can go up and you can still remain eligible for this program and remain eligible for the reduced rents that are associated with these units. So just to show you what that looks like, and these change every year, by the way, but right now, if you're a household size of 1 and you're applying for an 80% unit, you can make up to $55,800. Now let's fast forward a year from now and say you live in a unit, you like it, you want to renew, you want to keep living there, it's a great community, you're very happy. Your income could actually go up by over $20,000 to $78,120, and you would still be eligible for that unit at those rents. So the program allows people to grow an income and still stay in the unit, which is nice. You do have to recertify every year if you want to continue living in the unit. So every year, usually that process starts about 4 months before your lease end date, and you have to complete an application and submit the income and asset and tax documents, same as you do for the lottery, to demonstrate your eligibility. The good news is, you know, you will have already done it. You know how it works. You know, hopefully during the year you've collected some of those documents, and that will make the recertification easier, or hopefully easier. I want to say something else too, which is that, let me just go back a slide here. It's possible someone could qualify for units at different income tiers. So let me just give you an example here. So, you know, if you're a household size of 1, for a 60% AMI unit, you can make up to $41,850. If you're a household size of 1, you can make up to $55,800 for an 80% unit. So if you make somewhere more than $41,850 but less than $55,800, you'd be eligible potentially for an 80% unit, but not for a 60% because you make too much. But let's assume now that you make $40,000 a year. Your household size of 1. So you make $40,000. You're actually under both. Okay? You're under both. Now, so that means programmatically you're eligible for both. Now, the only question is, do you have sufficient income then to actually meet the leasing office screening criteria, which also might look at things like your assets, and maybe you have a lot of liquid assets. So in a case like that, you might be eligible for both. And that does happen sometimes, particularly if you have assets. And I should have touched on this before and I forgot to, but I'll mention it now. There's no minimum income requirement in the affordable housing program. Okay, there's no minimum income requirement in the affordable housing program. Now, the leasing office has their own minimum income criteria because they want to make sure that people can support the rent on the strength of their own income and assets. But to the extent that you see those minimum income criteria in the application or the info pack, that is a function of the leasing office's criteria. It's not an affordable housing program requirement, just so you know. And that would be the same ratio that they would use for a market rate applicant when they're assessing someone to see if they qualify for a market rate unit. You know, I think at this property, no, it's 3x. So they're looking to make sure you make 3 times the rent and income, monthly income, to ensure that you qualify. And it's that same ratio whether you're a market rate or an affordable applicant. If you're a voucher holder, ignore what I've just said. Minimum incomes do not apply to you. Okay, if you're a voucher holder, you can ignore anything about minimum incomes. They do not apply to you. But if you don't have a voucher, you have to sort of fall within that window of making enough money to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria, but not make more than what the program allows. I think I've what do I have left? All right, I think I've covered everything I want to cover. Other questions? Anyone have any questions? And again, this is all recorded. We'll put it on the website tomorrow. All this stuff is available in the information packet and application, so you can find it there too. But I'll hang out for a second here if anyone has any questions they want to ask. All right, I think that's it. Thank you for coming. Hope everyone has a great night. Hope you got something out of this session. And if you're interested, please apply. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, David. Appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye.